Hello, BookTube. Believe it or not, and at this point you're certainly going to believe it, I went back to the Brattle bookshop. First thing in the morning, I had someplace to be. It was right near the Brattle, so I was not about to resist, even though I've just been there the other day. Those of you who are new to the channel, and I'm not gonna harp on this, but there are a skyrocketing number of new people to the channel. The Brattle Bookshop is a used bookstore in Boston. They're very old and they're very great. They have a huge turnover, which is sort of a key to how enjoyable you'll find a used bookstore. They have a huge turnover. Stuff is new there all the time, not just in the store, but in the massive lot of sale books right next to the store, where I spent a lot of my time. And even very early this morning, the weather here was tempered enough so that that was not a hardship. Sometimes browsing the books out in the Brattle sale lot can be a hardship. It can be very painful to do, but not today. And with any luck, not for the next few months. But even though I'd already been there this week, I went again, and that's no overindulgence on my part. For years, I worked in a bookstore right up the street from the Brattle Bookshop, and I would literally go every day on my lunch. Never came back empty-handed, almost never. So I went today, and I want to show you what I got. I got a stack of books. I don't think I'll be getting a stack of books anytime else this week, unless they're sent to me in the mail. The mail today was a stack of books. But as with most of my trips to the Brattle, I started off with a couple of mystery novels. Mass market paperback mystery novels. Totally disposable, but they were dirt cheap. Everything here was dirt cheap. So I grabbed a couple more. I have in recent Brattle trips been intentionally looking for mass market murder authors that I don't know, books that I don't know, to sort of broaden what I'm doing in preparation for March Mystery Madness, which is right around the corner, a big booktube event. Me and a whole bunch of other booktubers are celebrating mysteries for the whole month of March. Tons and tons of events and ancillary stuff and read-alongs and recommendations, TBRs, all that sort of stuff, and live streams, I hope. And in preparation for that, I always look at the murder mysteries. But today, I got two murder mysteries that are known to me. One that I haven't read and one that I have, but they're known quantities. The one that I haven't read is this, From Dune with Death by Ruth Randell, which is a murder mystery of hers that involves, snail mail correspondence, what we would now call snail mail correspondence. What strange, tormented passion ended in a prim, proper, and happily married woman being murdered in a dark and tangled wood? Why was a gaudy woman's garish tube of lipstick found near the body? Who was Dune, the writer of mysterious love letters to the victim? Once upon a time, for those of you who are very young, once upon a time we used pens, which are tubes containing ink, in order to write messages, sometimes short, often very long, on pieces of paper, which we would then fold symmetrically, put in envelopes, and mail to their recipients. Put a stamp on it, you pay for postage, you put it in a box. Some guy comes along and collects it, and days or even weeks later, the recipient gets it, and they read it. And then they sit down and use a pen and paper to write a response and advance the conversation. Be lucky if you're getting an exchange of letters between two people in 1 month. This is what we did before the internet. This is what we did before email. And as far as I can remember, there are a vast number of murder mysteries that hinge in some way or another on snail mail correspondence. So I've never read this. The reason I say it's a known quantity is because I have read the author many times. So I know kind of what I'm getting. And then this next one I have read. But I haven't read it in a long time. I haven't read it since this mass market paperback actually appeared, which would have been 1985. 1985, when all the world made sense. This is The Nantucket Diet Murders by Virginia Rich, with a classic cover there. This is Virginia Rich wrote these books. They all star the same kind of sort of culinary approach to murder mysteries. She was, I think, one of the first people to do that, books that revolve murder mysteries that revolve around food, and even that include recipes. I think this was the last book that she wrote under her own head of steam. I think after she died, I think she died in 1985 or 1986, something like that, right around the time of this book. I think after that, a bunch of books were issued sort of in her name from her notes by a ghostwriter. But this wasn't. This was a hit, a genuine hit. She was born in Iowa. So many great wordsmiths were. And this book takes place on the island of Nantucket. And those of you who maybe aren't familiar with your American geography, or maybe aren't familiar with the east coast of America, where I live, there are concentric circles of waterfront, of the waterfront experience in Massachusetts. The first ring is Cape Cod. Massachusetts is a square. It's a rectangle. And jutting out from that rectangle into the ocean is a fishhook. That fishhook is Cape Cod. I know every inch of Cape Cod, every tree, every blade of grass, every grain of sand, every wild deer, every bat, every inch of it, every beach, private and public, all of it. And then a little ways off from Cape Cod, there is a big island called Martha's Vineyard, which is now a vacation resort. It takes hardly any time at all to get there by the ferry. You get on the ferry and you go up to the lounge and you think about whether or not you want to buy a bag of peanuts from the counter. And before you have even properly made up your mind, the ferry is docking again. And you're at Martha's Vineyard. And I know every inch of Martha's Vineyard, every bog, every private house, every grain of sand, every blade of grass. And then much further out from Martha's Vineyard, the third concentric ring, is the island of Nantucket. Much further out. So much so that Nantucketers for a long time in its history referred to America as the mainland. They referred to mainland America as America. They didn't view themselves that way. And Nantucket, once upon a time, was a total experience, because in winter it was cut off from the outside world almost completely. And I have actually wintered on Nantucket, so I know what that's like. I wintered on Nantucket before the internet, when the ferries would shut down, and when the houses, most of them, weren't winterized. So you were eating communally at the Bluebird Cafe. You were spending your nights in close proximity by the fires in a couple of heated buildings, even if you didn't particularly like the people you were spending the time with. It felt very much, in some ways, like an Arctic base camp. It isn't true anymore. Now there's the internet on Nantucket, so you're never alone. And there's also, I believe, all kinds of connections with the mainland around the year. But this book takes place, it's a murder mystery that takes place on Nantucket. And I only have 2 or 3 of those. There are plenty that take place on the Vineyard. And there are plenty that take place on Cape Cod. But I don't know of many that take place on Nantucket. Maybe I'm just missing them. But I haven't read this in all that time. Not since this was a hit. This was a hit. Everybody came in asking for it. The diet book. Do you have the diet book? And I knew and could tell people at the bookshop, don't go to the diet section. The diet book they want is this, which is not a diet book. But anyway, so I got 2 murder mysteries. I got 2 paperback murder mysteries. Just, oh no, ergonomics again. I got 2 paperback murder mysteries just because I'm going to burn through a lot of them in March. Then this next one was a find. The last time I went to the Brattle, just the other day, I found a copy of Boyce King Arthur in the Scribner's Illustrated edition with illustrations by Wyeth. And I love those editions. I want them all. I want not so much in the book collector sense, and just that they are the best experience of the book in a printed format. So in most cases, no matter what the book is, that's the volume that I'm going to want of that book. I'm just not going to want any others. I'm going to read them. I'm going to use them. I'm going to pull them down off the shelf. I'm not going to collect them and keep them in a nice set behind glass. But I'm not pushing it. I'm not hunting for them. I have no idea how expensive they would be on eBay or Amazon or anything like that. Instead, I just wait for them to come to me. And I found one. I found a beautiful condition copy of Boyce King Arthur. And I thought that would be my Scribner's experience for a good long time. But I found another one today. I found Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. And it's the only drawback to it is that it has no dust jacket. It's just the naked hardcover. Naked hardcovers are still quite nice, and this one has all the gold gilt there. Ordinarily, if you find a naked hardcover one of these things without a dust jacket, the dust jacket will still have the same illustration, but ordinarily, this will be all sun faded. You won't be able to see what the book is, and that's not true in this case. So I was happy to grab it for dirt cheap. I'm perfectly happy to have it either be a placeholder. Oh, look at that! There's little young David Balfour. His many, many adventures in the course of this book. I told myself, oh, look at that. I told myself that this is just, this can be a placeholder volume until I find a copy with a dust jacket, but I'm perfectly happy with this being the copy that I have. And I'm due for a massive Robert Louis Stevenson reread. I'm due for one of those really soon. And these will just be the volumes that I use. Although the one thing that bothered me today about my trip to the Brattle, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote an enormous amount. Those of you who only know him from Treasure Island, or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he wrote an enormous amount across a wide variety of genres. And one of the things that he wrote was Familiar Studies, a book called Familiar Studies, that is basically his collection of this kind of thing, bookish thoughts on various authors, not connected by any theme or school of criticism, just bookish thoughts on various authors, and they are great. Familiar names is great. It's just a fantastic volume, including, of course, the famous chapter on Samuel Pepys, which I just love. And I don't have a copy of that book. It's been issued in a million different editions, but I don't have a copy of it at all. And I saw one today at the Brattle, and it was kind of nice. It was a nice hardcover. It had all the nice little bells and whistles all around it. But I mean, it had other things in addition to Familiar Studies. It had a couple of other volumes. That's not a bar, because I love everything that Stevenson wrote, so I don't mind that there are other things in it. But it was one of those sets where, in addition to the titles of what was in the book, there's also a Roman numeral, because you're supposed to get the whole set. And I've never seen the appeal of those. I just never have. There's always a bunch of them. Whether it's, the Penguin Classics, they did an orange spine set of Anthony Trollope, all of Anthony Trollope. Really nice little volumes, but they have big numbers on the spines. I don't want a number on the spine. Same thing with Larry McMurtry's publishers. Briefly, I don't know if they still do, they briefly did all of the Lonesome Dove books with numbers on the spine. So you've got a beautiful trade paperback copy of Lonesome Dove, and it's got the title and the author on the spine, and then the number 4 or something like that. It's ridiculous. I don't know why anybody would do that. To me, it ruins it. So I actually left that behind. I left a little Stevenson behind. I will find a copy of Familiar Studies at some point. Or I have had it many times in the past, but I don't at the moment. But I was happy to find Kidnapped. I think, if I remember correctly, Kidnapped is Mark Richardson's favorite Robert Louis Stevenson novel, and I see why, because it's just full of shot and incident. For me, the favorite is going to be Black Arrow, but still, this will come into this room. That is one of the goals of a trip to the Brattle: is, are you going to find a keeper? Are you going to find books that you're going to hold on to rather than just cycle through? Same thing with this next one. Definitely a keeper. This is Fame and Folly by Cynthia Ozick. Again, just a collection of bookish pieces, prefaces, that sort of thing. It will definitely go on this shelf. Probably, I have Art and Ardor. It'll probably go with that. I have her other collection. Probably she's done others, but I was happy to find this one in a nice, like new trade or hardcover. I will put it on the shelf, but first I will dig through. I'll probably reread something. Her essay on Trollope is fantastic, so I might reread that. Or she also has a loving piece that I believe is collected in this volume about a book collector that she used to know. Just a wonderfully affectionate piece that is so wonderful. Seymour, Homage to a Bibliophile. And there's probably lots of other stuff in here that I haven't read, or I haven't read in way too long, so I was happy to find it. This next one is also well known to me. This is the UK hardcover of At Swim Two Boys by Jamie O'Neill. Huge thing. And fantastic. This came out 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, this was Shuggie Bain. It's a huge, overstuffed, gay novel. It's not a debut in this author's case, but I believe, if it wasn't a debut, then it was whatever the opposite of a debut is, because I don't think he's ever written anything else. I think he wrote a couple of things before this, and then he wrote this, and then it's been 20 years of silence. This is a story of, among other things, it takes place in Dublin in 1916, so you know that there's a lot of history that's going to pull in here, but it's the story of, the complicated story of love between two boys who grow into young men. But there's also a sort of orbiting planet, almost a third party, an older man who is in a way in love with both of them. And they have both had experiences with him of both deeply personal and historical and also sexual nature. And the book reaches its sort of climax, if you would, when the two boys swim out to a distant tiny island in order to claim it for Ireland. And when they get there, they are very happy. They raise the Irish flag, and they also, for the first time. It's an amazing moment. It's built up to, and the author doesn't let you down. But the thing that I love about this book, and I'm due for a reread. I haven't reread this in forever. The thing that I love about this book is the same thing I love about Shuggie Bain, which is the incredible banquet of the language involved. Not so much the story. The story's good in both cases, but the banquet of the language, just how joyful it is as an experience to read. So I'm looking forward to that. This is kind of the copy that I would want. There's an American edition of this in hardcover and in paperback that shows two boys in a faded sepia tone photo diving off of a jetty, but it's brown, and it's kind of, it looks like a sociology study. It doesn't look like anything like the experience of reading this book. So I knew this existed. I think I had a paperback of this once upon a time, but to see it in hardcover like this was great, because it's a keeper of a book. It's a keeper of a novel. It's that good. This next one, I would once upon a time have scoffed at the idea of this thing being a keeper, but I'm going to give it a try. I certainly remember a lot of it, and if it were pure junk, I might not remember as much of it as I do. Maybe I would. I certainly have never forgot a scene out of any Meg novel, but nevertheless, I don't think it is junk. I think it's time for a revisit, and I'm helped in that by a prop that I have ready. This is Crown in Candlelight by Rosemary Hawley Jarman, in this sketched, vaguely impressionistic cover with no flap copy at all. It's just a picture. You just get the whole picture there. And this is, I mean, partly the story of Henry V, King Henry V, partly the story of the rise of the Tudor dynasty, partly the story of the aftermath of the death of Richard III. But really, if I remember correctly, really this is a novel about Owen Tudor, the man whose offspring would eventually found the Tudor dynasty. And it's, the memories that I have of it are old. I haven't read this in a long time. But I seem to remember it being a wild thing of intoxicated language and lots of magic and blood and just overdone emotions, which I think maybe is what made me dismiss it a little when I first read it. But I recently found this, We Speak No Treason, by the same author, at the Brattle. See, they commissioned the same person to do this. And I reread this and loved it. Absolutely loved it. So I'm figuring I'm going to have the same reaction to this thing, in which case I'm really hoping that the person who sold both of these to the Brattle sold the author's other, I think there are a couple of other historical novels. I'd like both of them. If they are in companion volumes, The King's Grey Mare, I think, is one of them. But if they look like these, then all the better. So I'm always up to have sumptuous historical fiction. I guess you could call Kidnapped and At Swim Two Boys sumptuous historical fiction. So I'm on a theme here, and we'll end up with another theme. You can't go to the Brattle sale lot looking for themes. Can't do that. If you try to force the karma of the Brattle sale lot, it will bite you. You will get nothing. So you have to go and sort of take what you can find. And if in the course of browsing the carts, you notice a pattern, don't tell anybody. Don't crow it out. Just quietly collect those volumes. If you notice as you're looking around, without imposing, without expecting it, if you notice that you're starting to see a lot of books on a similar subject or along the same thematic line, then so much the better. as long as you don't ruin it for everybody else. And the last three books we're going to look at here are great biographies, which it's my favorite kind of book. It's my favorite kind of reading. I'm always up for it, but I'm not going to tell the Brattle sale lot what to do. And a lot of these are rebuys. In fact, all three of them are. Where I had them at one point or other and got rid of them in house moves or sent to somebody that I thought might like it more than I do. So I'm very happy to have them all back. I know that as biographies go, they are keepers. The first one is Savage Beauty. This is Nancy Milford's biography of the great poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. Just a big thing that I've had many times. I've had hardcovers and paperbacks of this. So I'm happy to have it again. Then there's this book. This is The Strange Ride of Rudyard Kipling by Angus Wilson, who was a huge character in his own right. And I would like to think that somewhere along the line, maybe in the UK, maybe not in America, Angus Wilson has had his own biography. someone has written a biography of him, maybe more than someone. I've never read a biography of him, and I would love to. Absolutely love to. What a fascinating, colorful, larger-than-life, tortured character. Uh, and also, in addition to that literary biography of him, which I would love to see if there is such a thing, I would also love, I know he was a critic, in addition to everything else. He wrote a lot of novels. What I wouldn't give to see his novels crop up at the Brattle, because they're all really enjoyable. But he was also a critic, a working critic. He wrote reviews of lots of different things. And I know that there have been at least a couple of volumes of those collected that I don't have, that I've never seen. And those would be great as well, because he was terrific at anything he set his pen to. And here he tells the story of Rudyard Kipling. And there have been a lot of bigger, more staid and more official, more critical biographies of Kipling, but this is the one. I think it's just head and shoulders better than all the others because of its readability, because of the fact that the author engages with Kipling rather than just, honors or memorializes him. It ends up being bracing. I know in a lot of ways that a lot of other Kipling stuff that I've read is not. And it's also, Savage Beauty is a call out to a line from an Ed of St. Vincent Millay poem. At Swim Two Boys is a call out to the title of a Flann O'Brien novel, and The Strange Ride of Rudyard Kipling is a call out to a short story by Rudyard Kipling. So I guess we're getting a lot of that. But I haven't had this in forever, and the last time I had it in a crappy trade paperback that I had to pamper in order to get anything out of it. It squeaked if I tried to use it. This thing is a hardcover. Be good for the rest of time. And then lastly, and far less high profile, this is Hermione Lee's biography of the novelist Penelope Fitzgerald. Which I have only ever had one copy of this thing. I've only ever read it once. I'm in the mood to read it again. I believe this was a heavily authorized biography. And I just read and reviewed Hermione Lee's heavily authorized biography of the playwright Tom Stoppard. And I had ambivalent feelings about it, very much so. And I'm wondering if I'm going to feel the same way here. The Ed of St. Vincent Millay book was also... Milford worked closely with the people who still had anything useful in the way of documents. But this, I think, if I remember correctly, was officially authorized. And I'm wondering if it's going to present with me the same kinds of ambivalence if I reread it. I love this book most of all because it's a great portrait of a working writer. Contracts, fees, freelancing, all that sort of stuff. It's a wonderful portrait of that kind of a life. And that's great. That's fantastic. I guarantee you that that's not as strongly emphasized in a lot of other literary biographies. I'm wondering if maybe the ambivalence about an authorized life will be calmer with this book, because if it was authorized, I believe it was done posthumously, whereas Hermione Lee was working with Tom Stoppard on his own biography, and that just raised my critics' hackles. I don't know why it did, because she's the greatest living biographer, but it did. Part of this will be a little bit of archaeology, but I also want the book. I also want the book, especially since all of these things were cheap. So I was able to. But that's one of the great things about the Brattle sale lot, is so you can buy an armload of books without really worrying about it. So that was my latest Brattle trip. We have Hermione Lee's biography of Penelope Fitzgerald. I recently reread a chunk of Penelope Fitzgerald and loved what I read, so I'm happy to read this again. We have The Strange Ride of Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling is one of my favorite authors, English authors, so I'm happy to have this biography. Then, let's see here, Savage Beauty, about the great poet Edna St. Vincent Millay, who I believe is taught but not read these days. I could be wrong about that. I don't think she has any fans on BookTube, for instance. Then Crown and Candlelight by Rosemary Hawley Jarman. This is another of her sprawling, passionate, historical romances. Then At Swim Two Boys by Jamie O'Neill, also a sprawling, passionate, historical romance, although they'd be a little strange to be in the same elevator together. Then Fame and Folly by Cynthia Ozick, another example of a novelist whose nonfiction I very much prefer. Kidnapped in the Scribner's Illustrated edition, a little bit of touch-up and it'll be fine, it'll be good to go on the shelf. Then the Nantucket Diet Murders, that'll be a blast from the past, haven't reread that in a long time. And finally, From Doom with Death, a little Ruth Rendell novel, take an hour to read, that I have not read. I've read a lot of Ruth Rendell, but I haven't read that one. So a wide variety of stuff, all to tempt me away from the reading and writing that I have to do today and tomorrow and all weekend long. But we all know about bookish temptations, right? I'm speaking to the choir there. So I'm gonna dig into these things and inventory them and see if there's any letters or whatnot in them, and then put them away. And see how many of these things are keepers. The murder mysteries are keepers because they are mass market paperbacks. I'm not going to bother getting rid of mass market paperbacks anymore. The Scribner's Illustrated is a keeper. The Cynthia Ozick is going to go on this shelf. At Swim Two Boys, great big hardcover. I will certainly enjoy rereading it. Fiction tends not to be keeper in the same way. The Rosemary Harley Jarman I will probably keep, or at least I'll reread it right away because We Speak No Treason impressed me so much, this recent read. And then the biographies are all keepers, just not in this room. So I think it's not bad as a Brattle day goes. We shall see. Technically in a year. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.